But the only thing worse than talking about what you want to happen when you die with those you love is not talking about it. Because you may be sitting there with them, not wanting to bring it up because it might upset them, and they may be sitting with you wanting to bring it up, but not because it might upset you. It's okay to talk about death. And when you're young, you need to understand that it's okay to talk about death, and it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to be confused. I've held many people's hands as they're dying and as they have died, and they're just as confused about death as some of us when we're very young.
So before we unpick all this work, really interested to get on camera about your background and your journey, how you got involved in funerals, and sort of what's taken you from the starting point to where you are now. To help you answer that question, I've got a little picture I'd like to show you as well, which might influence that answer.
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's where it all began for me. So when I was 14, our neighbours had a funeral business in the village of Mumbles, which is on the other side of Swansea. And it was a fourth generation family business. And the owner of that business lived next door to the house that I grew up in. And I was very interested about what funeral directors actually did. And as everybody in our profession knows, you come and you go at different times, and I was fascinated by the fleet of cars that he had and the different vehicles. So I used to ask him questions all the time. And in the end he said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll ask your mum and dad, and why don't you come in with me on a Saturday and you can help me clean the cars and help me do what I need to do, and you'll learn that way. So that's exactly what happened, and I thought I had the best Saturday job that anyone could ever wished for. I got some pocket money out of it, but I would have given my pocket money just to have that insight through the eyes of a young boy about how important death is, and how important understanding the importance of how we react when younger people ask questions. Lots of people that I asked questions of were quite uncomfortable, and that made me even more curious, which is probably a guiding feature of my life, really. If I don't know something, I like to ask, and I kept asking and I kept learning. So it was circumstantial. I didn't plan. I didn't think that I was going to give my life to the funeral sector. But if I could turn the clock back to 1982, as a 14-year-old boy, I would not change a thing.
Amazing, amazing. And then from that time, you went on to your education in Wolverhampton, and then you went on to then work with Indignity, who are the second biggest funeral directors in the UK.
End-of-life provider, yeah.
End-of-life provider. And how was that experience for you, from working at a fourth generation funeral home to then going on to one of the largest companies in the UK? How was that experience? What did you learn?
Well, there's a little bit missing, John. When I was doing my A-levels, and I did biology, chemistry and physics at A-level, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I felt that if I stuck with the sciences, it would keep my options open. Unfortunately, the gentleman who owned and ran that family business that I was working in, he had a heart attack, and I was very close to him. He was my mentor, and I carry him around in my pocket every single day when I think about what's important about funerals. But he had a heart attack and he was unable to work in the business. So in and around my lower six and upper six, I was also working in the business and supporting it as much as I can. Now, on the one hand, I probably didn't commit myself to get the A-level grades that I should have got and probably could have got. But on the other hand, I began to understand how important motivation is. Many people have heard me talk about the journey from your head to your heart. It's about 18 inches in reality. But sometimes that journey can be the longest and the hardest journey anyone makes. What I realized was that with myself working in and around the funeral sector, caring for the dead, caring for those that have lost them, I found that journey was incredibly short.
Yep.
And that sense of passion and purpose met absolutely in the middle. So I didn't actually get the A-level grades I needed to, and I wasn't sure then what next? What do I want to do? I wasn't sure I wanted to spend my whole career in the funeral service because I didn't really know what avenues lay ahead. So I thought, well, I'll take the opportunity, and I did go to Wolverhampton. It was a polytechnic then, it's university now. And I studied a number of modules, and I was given the opportunity in my final year to write a dissertation. And I was given a selection of businesses, markets, if you like, to do a sort of economic and business analysis of. And I didn't like any of the, typical of me, I didn't like anything that was on the menu, so I asked if I could do the funeral sector. And this was at the very end of the 1980s, early 90s. I actually wrote a dissertation on how consumers' behaviour was changing in respect of the funeral service, which ultimately got published.
Wow.
By the NAFD. And many people had helped me right across the sector. In the meantime, when I'd finished and graduated, the business that I'd been a part of had been acquired. And it was acquired at the time by the CWS, the Cooperative Wholesale Society. So when I came back after graduation, they made me feel very welcome. And I started working for the business that I'd been in, but under the umbrella of the Cooperative Wholesale Society.
Okay.
And it was then at 20 years of age that I was given the opportunity to run my first funeral home in Cardiff. And that opportunity was given to me by a long-standing, career-long friend, Andrew Davis. So it was having the opportunity to manage and run what I felt was my own business. It could have had my name above the door. It didn't, but that didn't, that didn't matter. I became synonymous with the business, and that business became synonymous with me. So I worked for the Cooperative Wholesale Society, and I was given lots of opportunities to learn and develop, which was really important at that point in my life. And then I was given the opportunity to go to Scotland, which I was really keen to do because it was a different country, there were some different laws there, some different customs, some different traditions. So I ran a number of businesses in Edinburgh, and that was a really, really defining moment for me. It fueled my desire and capacity to learn, and that has followed me right through. And I think when you work in funeral sector, you really do have to see every day as a school day.
Yep, that's fascinating. And your dissertation, here is the front cover of it here.
That is the front cover of it.
And when we initially met properly through NAFD, I saw your dissertation, and a lot of things you're writing about, so funeral services in the 1990s, you spoke a lot about what was sort of coming, which we're seeing now, I think. So the laying out of the deceased, the body, the burial rites are more consolation for the living than the assistance to the dead. And I think that's what we're seeing now regarding changes in the funeral industry, which we were speaking about back in the late 80s. From all that you've done and that journey that you've been on, what changes have you seen, and where do you think it's going to go next from what you did in the 1980s, 1990s?
Well, I think what was predicted was that people's attitudes to death were going to change, and in many respects needed to change. In sort of traditional British society, as I mentioned from my formative years, people aren't necessarily comfortable talking about death, talking about their own mortality, facing something that probably none of us truly understand, and many of us don't accept is going to happen, but we know that it will. And I think as society's changed and as people have changed with society, I felt that there was going to be an increased demand for a more personal approach to saying goodbye to somebody that you love, and a less reliance on perhaps a more traditional, structured funeral. Now, obviously, the shift from burial to cremation was one of the first fairly significant moves, but in the early days, the crematorium were built to resemble a church in many respects. And it was only after the service that the difference between cremation and burial became very obvious to people. But beyond that now, if you look at thankfully, the whole range of new crematoria that have been built around the UK and around the world, there's an incredible imagination and creativity, but they're all designed around the living, John.
Yep.
And that was the point in the dissertation.
Yep.
There's a huge importance to respect and care for the dead. And that's why the National Association of Funeral Directors, you became president of that association. I'm the CEO of that association, but we didn't kick it off. 120 years ago, the only National Association of Funeral Directors decided that funeral directors needed to come together, because it was by coming together that they could better serve the bereaved.
Yeah.
So I think personalisation, choice, and a willingness to encourage people to talk about death. There's been a lot of news about funeral planning, some good and some not so good. But the only thing worse than talking about what you want to happen when you die with those you love is not talking about it.
Yeah.
Because you may be sitting there with them not wanting to bring it up because it might upset them, and they may be sitting with you wanting to bring it up, but not because it might upset you.
Yeah, yeah.
It's okay to talk about death. And when you're young, you need to understand that it's okay to talk about death, and it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to be confused.
Yeah.
I've held many people's hands, John, many people's hands as they're dying and as they have died. And they're just as confused about death as some of us when we're very young.
Yeah.
So it's not something to run away from. It's something to accept and learn to accept and to talk about. Funeral directors, I think, are quite unique in many respects because we become part of a bereaved family's life, maybe for 4, 5 or 6 weeks. But in that 6 weeks, the family become part of their funeral director, and the funeral director becomes part of that family. And that family will never forget the difference that a funeral director's made. And I think that's quite a special place to occupy. And after the funeral, you will know, as I do, so many of our clients will come back to see us.
Yeah.
If they're passing the door, they'll come in. They'll want to sit down and talk. What do they want to talk about? They want to talk about the person who died. It might be a special anniversary. They might be having a low day. They might be having a high day. But they want to talk about that person. Yeah. And funeral directors, we'll talk all day. We'll talk all day and all night with people. But sometimes people in the local community don't know how to face bereaved people. I've had many accounts given to me where somebody's friend has actually walked on the other side of the road, not because they don't like them anymore, because they're bereaved, but because they don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't have to say anything.
Yeah.
It's that old adage. Sometimes people think, well, I don't know what to do with that person.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you just do nothing with them.
Just be present.
Just be yourself and be a friend.
Yeah.
And listen. And don't shut down conversations about somebody that's passed away. You know, talk about it. Keep their memory alive. Deal with the good memories. Process the bad memories. It's so important.
There's so much to unpick here. So on this podcast, we talk a lot about connection points. So things that we can do to connect to our loved ones. And actually, by creating connection points, it allows us to move forward in a more healthy, positive way without grief. And you talk about the space in the crematorium, making it their own space, personalisation, and these are all connection points, stuff that you were doing in the 80s in your dissertation. You mentioned about families coming into the funeral home afterwards as well. I wonder, actually, I've never really considered this. Do we become a connection point to someone's loved one as well afterwards?
I would say absolutely yes, but not a negative connection point.
No, it's healthy.
I think it helps people remember the time in a positive way. And I also think it underlines the difference that funeral directors make, but also the difference funeral directors make by guiding families through choices and options. And personalisation is so important. You know, people always ask, well, who's the funeral for? You know, is it for the person who's died? Is it for the family that mourn them? Is it for their friends? Is it from their colleagues? Is it from their community? We know the answer is yes. And by helping people put the right amount of thought into what they do, funeral directors can help people get it right.
Yeah.
And that makes no difference whether it's a fairly large and grand and complicated funeral arrangement, or whether it's the simplest funeral arrangement that anyone could make. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What matters, John, is that it's right. It's right for the person who's died, and it's right for those who mourn them. But the consequence of not giving the right thought is a serious one.
Yeah.
Because moving on from the death, moving on from the time of grief, that journey can be made far more difficult if you look back and think, well, actually, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd said this, or I wish I hadn't said that. And funeral directors occupy that space between the living and the dead. And if you have the right relationship with your funeral director, and they have the right relationship with you, they will help you make decisions that you will look back with a warmth and a pride, however traumatic the circumstances were at the time.
And it's evident again that difficult moments are often important moments, and that's that space that you talk about that we're in. We're there to facilitate and help people through that time. And I think because it is a difficult time, that's why it's difficult to get the awareness of what we do, because it's a difficult moment and people don't want to do difficult things, but actually it's an important time. And I think for me personally, and obviously what the NAFD do, is that it shines a light on the amazing work that funeral directors do all over the UK and the world, actually. You know, meeting funeral homes in the States, there's some special people trying to help people at their worst time, their lowest time. So with the NAFD then, what is the goal and focus of the NAFD? Obviously I know the answer to the question, it's inside me now from my time as president and my service, but to ask you the question, what is the NAFD there for?
My view of death is that it's a great leveller. And as a national association of funeral directors, not just across the United Kingdom, but actually all around the world, we have members all around the world, John. You know, you've travelled the world in the name of NAFD. I think for me, it's about making sure that funeral directors have moved sufficiently at the same pace as the society they serve. Because we are servants. We are servants, we're here to serve, we're here to advise, and we're here to put control back in the hands of a family who may have had control taken away from them in all sorts of different ways. So the National Association of Funeral Directors, you know, we've got four core values. And the first of those is inclusivity. And it's really important that as a national association, we recognise the rich tapestry and the fabric of our society. And we ensure funeral directors to be in touch with the differing needs that we see right across the landscape in the United Kingdom and beyond. So it's really important that funeral directors tailor themselves to meet the needs of the communities, and that's all communities, and that's all sorts of people. Secondly, we want funeral directors to be progressive. We don't want to operate in a sector where we do something because that's what we've always done. Because if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. So we want funeral directors to think about how they can reflect the changing needs of the people that they serve. And remember, the National Association of Funeral Directors is far wider than funeral directors. We have crematoria in membership, John. We've got a whole host of suppliers and vehicle manufacturers and coffin manufacturers. We've got all this innovation in the sector, and the NAFD provides that North Star, that lens, to make sure that our suppliers and our funeral directors are in constant communication, to be progressive, to take the service that the bereaved people receive in this country to the next level. Thirdly, you know, I mentioned earlier that in 2025 we will have been established for 120 years. There's a lot of experience, a real repository of knowledge and an asset to develop in the sector. We have a learned history. We have a learned history of the sector getting it right. And we have a learned history sometimes of the sector not getting it right. But we want to use that knowledge to shape the future. And the NAFD is the only place that brings together all of that experience and all of that knowledge to look ahead and to set about changing what needs to change, but also to preserve and protect some of the core values that are associated with caring for the dead, that transcend county or country or race or religion. Some really important core standards that everyone's entitled to. And our final value, John, and I think this really underpins the whole relationship between a funeral director and their client, it's trust. It's trust. I often talk about sometimes end-of-life care, where people have to choose somewhere for the person that they're going to lose to spend their last days. And if people are able to, because it's not everyone's choice, not everyone has the choice, but if people are able to, they will think very carefully where they want their loved one to spend their last days, whether that's their child in a hospice, whether that's their partner in an adult hospice, or whether it's someone towards the end of their life, in perhaps a care facility or a residential home. Now, families put generally They put a lot of thought into where the person's going to be, what the environment's like, who are the people, who are going to be the last hands that care for this person that I love. When death happens, I don't believe that sense of care disappears. It may change, but it doesn't disappear. If I give an example of a hospital, if you've been regularly visiting someone you love who's slipping away before your eyes, you don't stop caring about them because they've been moved from the ward to a different part of the hospital. You don't. And I think funeral directors need to harness that care and reassure people that the funeral director will care for their loved one as much as they did, or the nurses or the doctors or the counsellors, whoever. The funeral directors will pick up that very, very sacred role. When I was 14, I picked up a very old copy of the Manual of Funeral Directing. And, well, you'll know this, John, as a tutor. There's the functions of a funeral director. And one of those is custodian of the deceased. And that will always be, it will always be a primary factor. And remember, it's how people care about the dead that really shows how they care about the living. And integrity is about doing the right thing when nobody's watching you. And I think from a National Association of Funeral Directors point of view, we want people to have choice with funeral directors. We want people to choose the funeral director that's right for them. We want people to choose the level of service that's right for them, and we want people to choose the options that are right for them. But we want to ensure that there is a minimum acceptable standard that people can expect to receive from any funeral director anywhere in the United Kingdom. And that's our mission.
Yeah. It's an exciting mission, and I feel very privileged and proud to have played a small part in that, like so that history and the direction as we move forward. And also from my own personal point in taking care of people who die, the privilege involved in that, it's very difficult to describe. 2 years ago my granddad died, and my dad and I brought him into our funeral home. What was really interesting is that actually the care we showed my granddad and what we did for him, nothing changed if it was anybody else. And that proved to me actually what we do is how valuable it is, but actually it's so deep rooted. And as you just said, it's the care we provide when no one's watching. That's the true part of what we do, really, that true trust which has to be there. Also, I'm really intrigued as well, you mentioned about the tutoring and education of NAFD. That's always been a big part of what NAFD do as well, to help people improve as individuals and also as a sort of collective funeral home. Could you talk through about what NAFD do about education? What is the offering from NAFD?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, until the NAFD came along, there was no offering. Is the starting point of the conversation there, John. And as an association, we felt that learning and development belongs to everybody. We call ourselves a profession, and I believe we are. But in comparison to other professions, entrance is not by qualification, certainly not by formal qualification. So the National Association of Funeral Directors created several formal qualifications, one of which is the Diploma in Funeral Directing that you have, and I have, and you have, through your own work, encouraged and tutored so many people to get. But the education side of NAFD goes far beyond vocational qualifications, and we do other qualifications that are geared very vocationally around the jobs that people do. So we have, mortuary management qualifications. We train people in care of the deceased and signpost them to lots of other training. And we have just launched, as you will know, our own unique digital learning platform, NAFD Inspire. Why is it unique? Well, there's lots of digital learning platforms out there, but we believe so strongly in the sector and so passionately about the continuing professional development of those that work in the sector at any level. We decided to create our own, but uniquely it will be full of funeral related content that has been written and endorsed by funeral professionals from this country. And we will blend that with other learning material on a whole range of skills that actually are life skills, which we feel are really important for people working in the funeral sector. So our view is, it doesn't matter where in the country you work or what role you perform in the funeral sector. What matters is that you're better today than you were yesterday, and will help you be better tomorrow than you are today.
Yeah, fantastic. And you mentioned the diploma course, which I know you've carried out as well. And I've actually, just to make you smile, I've managed to acquire a picture of your cohort here. What year was this, Andrew?
Okay, well, that was actually, that wasn't my diploma cohort.
Oh, okay.
No, that was, well, it was my management diploma cohort.
Oh, okay.
So it was a funeral management diploma, which I did in 1992.
Okay.
I haven't changed a bit, John, have I? See, I did have hair.
Of course not. Of course not.
I did have hair. But do you know what? That group of people all went on to help others become the best they can be.
Yeah.
And I think if you're lucky enough to have been supported and mentored in the funeral sector, as I was, and wherever you work, there's a real value in passing that on.
Yeah.
And helping other people be the best they can be. And I think the NAFD brings those sorts of people together, people that want to make a difference. And if I can say, you're a perfect example of that.
No, thank you, Andrew. I think I've given a lot to the NAFD, but I've also gained so much as well. I've learned so much. I've grown as an individual and professional from my involvement at NAFD. So I'm very grateful to the NAFD as well, what it's done for me. So it works both ways. Also, again, we've spoken about improving standards, and unfortunately we have seen negative practice in the UK, especially around Hull, which has been in the press, and you've been involved in the media heavily, trying to reassure the public about standards. How do we measure standards, and how do we, again, provide reassurance to the bereaved people that what's happened up in Hull is an extreme situation? How do we provide that reassurance?
Okay, well, I talked about the trust, the trust factor, and it's wrong to say that there has been no regulation in the funeral sector. Okay, there has been no statutory regulation in funeral directors as such, but there has been control and oversight and compliance. There has been a framework in place, but that framework is put in place by trade associations like the National Association of Funeral Directors. But it's elective, John. So if somebody's running a funeral business in the UK, for example, they can decide whether they want to open their business up to scrutiny an oversight, or whether they'd prefer that nobody saw the way that they operated. And unfortunately, a number of funeral directors that have been operating in a way that none of the established trade associations would accept have been able to operate that way because they're not subject to scrutiny. So what we're calling on is for the government to support us with some statutory powers so that there's a level playing field. And if people want to trade as funeral directors, if people want to set up as funeral directors, we want to encourage that. We want to encourage new people into the market. That's a really good thing. But there has to be a level playing field, and there has to be consistent standards. And unfortunately, not every funeral director in the United Kingdom signs up to be a member of a trade association. And there's a choice of trade association, so not signing up to either begs the question, why don't you want people to understand how you run your business? From a public reassurance point of view, we would say look for the logo. Look for the National Association of Funeral Directors logo, because it means that the business is operated with a degree of oversight. It also means that as clients, if something goes wrong, which doesn't happen very often, but it can happen, if something goes wrong, it means that families are protected. They've got redress. And it's during those dark and difficult times that we can support the family and also the funeral director in resolving and moving forward. So I have to say, having worked right through the sector in small companies, in large companies, in independent businesses, in more corporate setups, I have to say, I cannot see one reason for not being a member of a professional trade association, but I can give you any amount of reasons not to remain outside of them.
Yeah.
It's really important, and I mentioned you get one chance, John, one chance to arrange a funeral, and you will live with those consequences. You can get married again, you can get baptized or christened at any point in your life, but you get one chance to arrange the funeral that's right for your loved one.
Is there a danger with regulation if government get involved in how far they go with this, and could it potentially hinder the service we provide the bereaved by pushing too far and not actually understanding the work that we do?
Well, there's a plus side to regulation, and I think we've probably covered that, but there is a downside sometimes. There's the cost of regulation. And if you look at other sectors that have been regulated, the water sector is a good example. You see costs going up, but you don't necessarily see the consistency or the progress that regulation was designed to bring. From a funeral point of view, I think it's really important that the government work with us and help us shape the regulation. Because there's never been statutory regulation in the funeral sector, it has to be built, and now is the time for us to build it right. We can't just pick up a framework that's been used in another sector and put it into funeral service, because funerals are not commodities, and they never should become commodities, John.
Yeah.
They're very individual, very personal expressions of love and a way to say goodbye to people. So we need to ensure that any framework doesn't stifle the level of service that the funeral directors are able to offer. We also don't want it to be cost prohibitive, because we don't want to drive good funeral directors out of the market, and we don't want to inhibit alternative funeral directors wanting to offer an alternative service. All we're saying is there are some things that are non-negotiable, and caring for the dead and an honest and transparent support and compassion for the living are non-negotiable.
Yeah, I'd agree. Now we're at a stage where obviously trust is so important, and it always will be, but now we need that backing now from governments, and hopefully they give us the power that we need and that you need to really push those standards up further.
I mean, the reality is we can expel a member from our association, or other trade associations can expel a member, and we will do that and have done that if we feel the member is not worthy to have the National Association of Funeral Directors above their door. But actually, if we expel a member, it means they're operating outside of scrutiny. It means that nobody's watching over what they do, supporting them, advocating them, calling them to account. And that can't be the right outcome. What we want to do is insist that people are brought into the fold and subscribe to the standards that all bereaved people and those they have lost are entitled to. So we just need some teeth for the rare, and it is rare, for the rare occasion where people think that they can come into the funeral sector and cut corners, because you can't. It's too important a decision for that.
Yeah, it's non-negotiable. Thank you, Andrew. It's really interesting to unpick this very special work in which the funeral industry does. So you've been now in the role as CEO for 18 months?
16
months. A lot's happened in 16 months, and I'm really interested to know what has been your biggest challenge in that time.
Probably the transition for me from running a business to running a trade association. We exist for and because of our membership, and that means, rightfully so, that we have to balance the needs right across the broad church of membership that we have. One of the many virtues of the NAFD, and I think the reason that it's survived for so long, 120 years is a long time, is that we have equity in membership. So to us, it doesn't matter if you do one funeral a week or if you're a funeral director doing 1,000 funerals a week. What matters to us is that each and every time people are served properly and the deceased are looked after. But balancing the needs of different types of funeral directors is always a challenge. We do a number of things in the NAFD. We've already covered the fact that we provide a comprehensive suite of education and training, that we work with our partners in the Independent Funeral Standards Organisation on compliance and inspection. We run webinars and lots of things to educate and spread the message about what good looks like. We also run conferences and seminars, and we do lots of things as a trade association. Now, different size of members will have different needs. What's really important to me is that any member, if they have a problem and they come to us, as far as they're concerned, they're the only member that we're dealing with at that time. Very much like a family that will come to you. It's only one funeral that you're dealing with. And I think that's really important. But it can be a challenge. And I'm really, really grateful for the rich experience and history that we have in our constitution. But there are some things that I think we need to modernise. And there will always be a tension between what was and what needs to be. And my job has always been, John, I would not have gone on the career journey and the life journey that I've been on if I didn't take people with me. You have to take people with you. And sometimes people will want to race ahead of you and you want to pull them back. And sometimes they'll hang back and you want to bring them forward. So my job is to keep the NAFD moving forward, but not leave anyone behind, and to make sure that we blend our constitution and our traditions that have served us well with a framework that broadens the appeal of our association to all funeral directors, whatever community, whatever business model, whatever outlook that they have. They feel that there's a place in the National Association of Funeral Directors for them where they will be welcome, where they will matter, and where their voice is heard.
That's incredible. And I've felt that from a sort of small to medium size company, service provider. The NAFD, I fit in the NAFD, and actually I've sat on the exec committee with CEOs of co-op, and actually we're there for the same mission, to take care of the bereaved. And that's incredible, you know, to actually, those different varieties of as you've spoken about, you all come together. And that's how you improve, and that's how you grow as individuals and also companies as well. So I very much back what you say, and I see that and feel that. And on the flip side, that's a challenge which I think you embrace. What has been the highlight for you in those first 16 months, if you have one?
I think for me, and bear in mind, I've got many faults. One of them is I can be impatient. Yeah. But we have achieved an awful lot in a short space of time. And I use the word we very, very deliberately, John, because it's team. Funerals don't happen because of individuals. Funerals happen because of a team of people. Some seen, some unseen, but all equally important. Well, we have achieved a lot here at NAFD, not just in national office, but by working in partnership with our Scottish and our Welsh and our Northern Ireland executives. We've had a lot of change in a fairly short space of time, and change can be tiring for people, and I'm very respectful of that. But I'm fired up now, ready to take us on to the next chapter. I'm delighted that we've made the progress that we have on the Inspire Learning platform. I'm delighted that we've created an alumni to bring back all those diploma holders, the thousands of people in the UK that hold that diploma, bring them back into the fold and provide a platform for their continuous professional development. So I'm really pleased about that. I'm delighted that we've created a Gold Partner program so that by having the right strategic and commercial arrangement with some of our suppliers, we can make sure that our members get the best deal, and a deal that they wouldn't get anywhere else, for the goods and services that they need. So I'm really, really pleased about that. The influence that we have across the sector is unchallenged, and for that reason we are very much the go-to people for anyone in the UK, and I'm pleased about that. But particularly we have worked very closely with not only the government in Westminster, but the devolved administrations in Holyrood, in Stormont, and in Cardiff. So I'm really pleased that somehow we are striving to be all things to all people. We won't always get it right, and we haven't always got it right, John. But we are well on with our mission now to prepare and to chart the progress for the next 120 years. And I'm absolutely delighted with the support of our members, because without our members, we wouldn't exist. And I'm really, really pleased that we've been able to travel this journey as one group of people that get out of bed for the same reason. And we get out of bed to make a difference. And it's perhaps for people outside of our profession, you'll never really understand how poignant and compelling that difference is that you make to people. And as I said earlier, it's a difference they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And I think, John, it's a difference that we carry with us as well. It's a huge privilege. It's a huge privilege. It's not an easy job, far from it. But goodness me, the reward in a job done well fills us all with a sense of pride balanced with a natural humility. And long may that continue.
No, I totally agree, Andrew. And also you mentioned the team, how important that team is. I will always be very grateful for what you and the team have done for me personally, and also in the support of sort of my mission with the petition to add content on death, dying and bereavement into the national curriculum. We're really banging on the door now, Parliament, with this. And I'll always be very grateful for that, what you've done. And how do you think that could affect society? You and I have spoken about this in the past. You've spoken a lot on this about end of life as well, and that connection throughout. How does that tie into this, the petition?
Well, I think it puts on the table a safe and acceptable way to talk about what many of us struggle with. And I think if you trace back people's journeys of life, sometimes we can all take the wrong path. Sometimes circumstances come that make life difficult for people. Perhaps the wrong choices are taken. Perhaps the wrong paths are taken. In so many instances, what I've learned to understand is you can trace back root causes to problems in adult and later life through perhaps the inability to deal with or the unacceptability to talk about loss of someone that you love, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's a parent, whether it's a sibling. When you're younger, John, it might be a pet. It might be the loss of a friendship. Loss is something that we all need support on. And feeling lost is a horrible feeling. It's a horrible feeling now if you get lost somewhere you're not familiar, somewhere you don't know the way out of. So what I hope, and for all the work that you and so many others have done, I hope that it makes children understand it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to talk about how you feel. And if you talk about how you feel, you're sharing how you feel with someone else. And you're not on your own, because they will have felt just the way that you feel. And I think it will help people understand perhaps the right way to have difficult conversations. Because sometimes what we think is difficult through the eyes of a child is not difficult, and vice versa. So I think it will open up the discussion about death and loss in a positive way, in a constructive way, and in an acceptable way for our society in 2024. And that's unlocking that, John, is a tremendous ambition, but it's so important in later life, when people look back to their first experience, you talked about touch points, those first touch points when something happens that you really don't understand. You don't want to be on your own.
You mentioned as well that you know people who are now adults who cross the road, and I believe as well that there'll be less of that because people will have some basic and simple tools in knowing how to communicate and actually understand these emotions in which we go through, which again you talked about in your dissertation, which is really interesting. Andrew, I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's fascinating, it moves me, it excites me. Thank you so much. And I have to say as well, being part of the small team who put you in this position, I'm immensely proud to have been involved in that as well. And I have lots of highlights of my year as president, but actually one of my biggest highlights is actually installing you as part of that small group of people. I think the NAFD is moving forward in a very exciting but safe way. I think Henry Sherry, who was part of the group that established the NAFD, would be very content in where the NAFD is at and where it's heading. So thank you. And I don't want to embarrass you with this as well, but I'm really interested to get the thoughts of what your family think, of what you've achieved in your life, from the young boy going in on a Saturday to going to Scotland, all this journey that you've been on to where you're at now as NAFD CEO. It's incredible, that journey, but it also feels so right. I think the role is correct for you, and you are correct for the role. It's actually a perfect fit. And I've got a picture here, if I'm okay to show you, and there's one person in particular. I'll be really interested to get your views on what he would think of what you've done and where you're at, and what you're doing for the association in particular. This man here, your father, what do you think?
Oh.
What do you think he'd make of what you've achieved?
What would he make of what I've achieved? Well, I scattered ashes with him last weekend for a friend of ours. He's very proud. He's very proud of the journey that I've been on. But it's not been a journey that I've been on in isolation.
Yep.
And when you talk about family, when you give your heart and soul to the funeral sector, you also give part of your family, because they have to share you. They have to share you during the working week, and they have to share you during the night, and they have to share you over holidays. But when they see that sense of reward and fulfillment, they understand why you do it. And I could not have traveled the journey I traveled without my family behind me. First of all, my parents, and then my beloved wife, Mandy, long-suffering, patient, tolerant, who has her own career as well, by the way. But she has been like a rock behind me. And my children, my children's quiet acceptance that sometimes we can't do what I said we were going to do because I have to be somewhere else. They know I have to be there. I know I have to be there. And it's not mentioned. So yeah, we live what we learn, don't we? And I've had a very supportive family. It must be very difficult for people that want to work in the funeral sector that perhaps don't have that. I'm aware how lucky I am and how lucky we are. But it's about making a difference. I'll never forget, my eldest son was asked in infant school what his parents did. All the children were asked, what do your parents do? If they've got a job, what do they do? And he was only 7. And I asked him, I said, well, what did you say? And he said, my dad cares for people who have died. And I said, I couldn't have put it better myself. It's what we do. And it's by caring for people who have died that we care for people who are alive and help them to be alive again. And that's what we're here for, John.
Andrew, I think that is a wonderful time to call a close on the interview. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I look forward to being the support to you as things move forward.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
You've been in my photo drawer. Is that okay?
That's wonderful. Felt very moved.
Where'd you get all this from?
Felt very moved.
Come on.
I felt very moved by all this.
It's alright, you should do. This is about making a difference, isn't it?
Stuff this is.
It comes from in there, doesn't it?